Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Regarding the Holy Quran, the misconception I'd like to bring into discussion today relates to the fact that most people think that the line of argument of the Quran is not based on any reasoning. The message of the Quran, in other words, is not based off any reasoning. It is something that one must accept at all costs. So therefore, they would say that Quran is asking us to blindly follow all its directive. And they would typically say that as far as, for example, God is concerned or the hereafter is concerned, one has not seen these realities, and the Quran is asking us to believe in them, so therefore we must believe in them. And we must not question these realities, because these realities are something which the Quran has asked us to believe in, and if we are not able to see them, then we must not insist on the fact that we must after only seeing them, shall we believe in them, and we have to accept them come what may. So therefore, in their opinion, the Quran does not primarily address one's intellect. And if our intellect has some questions regarding the Quran, if it has some arguments regarding the Quran, it must snub them and it must lull them to sleep and accept what the Quran says. Now, this is what the general approach towards understanding the Quran is, that the Quran must be understood and must be followed, whatever it says. Now, this is something which needs to be revised. You must revisit this approach, and we must realize that the Quran says that every tenet of its message, all the precepts of its message, are based on sound reasoning. Thus, for example, if the Quran says that we have to believe in God, it offers very, very, very solid arguments to believe in God. Similarly, if it asks us to believe in the hereafter, it offers and it presents very, very solid arguments to believe in the hereafter. It is not that it does not present any such arguments and just asks us to believe in these realities. This is because it wants us to communicate these realities to other people, to convince them, for example, non-Muslims, for example, our next generation. It tells them that this is something which is the call of our own heart. It is something which is found in our own intuition and mind, whatever arguments it presents. So therefore, the message of the Quran, whichever it says, is not based on any emotional understanding of the Quran. It is entirely based on intellect and reasoning. And the Quran, at a number of places, urges its followers to reflect on its verses, to reflect on what the Quran says and accept what the Quran says, because it is something which conforms to the highest possible forms of reasoning. Thus, for example, we know that in the hereafter, the Quran at one place says that people who will be consigned to hell, they would say, "Law kunna nasma'u aw naqilu ma kunna fi ashabis sa'ir," which means that had we heard the truth and used our own intellect, we would not have landed here. We would not have landed here in hell. So therefore, it lays primary stress on the fact that one must use one's intellect, one's mind, in understanding the message of the Quran. The message of the Quran is not based on any emotional enforcement of facts. It is based on intellectual understanding of those facts, so that they become part of our own reasoning, and so that we are convinced of what we are being told. And similarly, we are able to communicate this reasoning to others, because the only line of communication between two people is reasoning. We cannot simply present our emotions or our inclination towards a view and then ask another person to believe in it. He has his own emotions, he has his own beliefs. Why should he come to your beliefs? The only thing which is common between us and others is the fact that we have been given intellect. We can communicate the reasoning, the line of reasoning of certain things to others. So therefore, when the Quran asks us to believe in certain realities, it is entirely wrong to say that it asks us to do so because we have to blindly follow it. In other words, as the term goes, we have to profess iman bil ghaib, which is wrongly translated as to profess belief without understanding, without questioning anything. On the other hand, iman bil ghaib or yu'minuna bil ghaib, wherever it is used in the Quran, it means that we profess belief in what we don't see, not because that thing which is not being seen asks us, or the Quran asks us to believe it without understanding it, but because there are very sound reasons and arguments present outside which lead us to that thing which we may not be able to see at that time. Thus, for example, if the Quran asks us to believe in God, then of course we cannot see God, but it presents very sound arguments on the basis of which we can believe in God. So the Quran says the people who do polytheism, who commit polytheism or do shirk, they are people who are actually challenging the truth, because they have no arguments against it. So shirk is something which is challenged, or polytheism is something which is challenged by the Quran on the basis of reasoning. It says people have no argument and no reasoning for polytheism, and they have concocted a lie against God. So similarly, on all other things, the Quran's argumentation is based on rationale and reasoning. We can understand that rationale if we reflect deeply. We can communicate that rationale if we reflect deeply. So we must understand that the whole message of the Quran, the precepts of which the Quran intends us to communicate, they are all based on sound reasoning. It is only a matter of getting down and understanding what their reasoning is. So if we don't do that, we'll not only not be able to be convinced, our heart might not be convinced on certain realities, and we might not end up as good practicing Muslims simply because we are not convinced of things. But since we have been told, we are accepting them. Not only this will be something which would go against us, but also the fact is that we would not be able to communicate the message of the Quran to others, because the only line of communication is reasoning. And the Quran, as I said, says that all its precepts, all its message, whatever is part of its message, is based on reasoning, is based on arguments. It is only a question of opening our eyes and ears, of understanding those arguments and abandoning this emotional approach, abandoning this approach of without understanding things and acting upon them. We must understand why we believe in God. We must understand why we think that there is going to be hereafter. We must understand why we think that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the last prophet of God. What are the arguments which say so? Unless we do that, we'll not be able to convince our next generation, which stares us in our eyes and asks us these questions, and the only answer we have is to snub them. This is, of course, no answer. If we snub them, they will not accept what we are presenting them. So it is our duty to understand all the reasoning behind the things that we want, not only to our next generation, but also to people, for example, who would not be understanding the message of Islam. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين والمسلمات.